Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody today to our seminar. I'm Jennifer Bess. I'm President of Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to see a full house. On behalf of our Center for Enterprise Exploration and Defense in Space, I want to welcome our panelists who are here today, and thank you everybody again for joining us. The Institute is an independent, nonpartisan think tank here in DC focused on science and technology policy. We originated out of the Office of Technology Assessment in Congress back in '94, and we've been doing science policy ever since. On many occasions, we've been asked to talk about space and space commercialization. Actually, about 20 years ago, we did a study for NASA regarding ISS commercialization with Dan Golden, the administrator at the time. Commercialization of the space domain has long been a dream of policymakers here in DC. Over the years, many attempts have been made through legislation and policy directives, and NASA's made strides, especially in the last couple of years, to accomplish this goal. So what makes today different than 20 years ago when we were talking about this? We have a reconstituted National Space Council. The plummeting costs of launch have drastically improved our ability to commercialize space. Record investment in startups in space, which is huge. Not just big companies can do it anymore. There are a lot of small companies that can come into the domain. And the new policies especially have really enhanced our ability from an economic perspective to engage in that domain. Enough from me. We have actual leading experts here to talk today. So the Potomac Institute's Board of Regents member, former administrator, who actually really needs no introduction, Charlie Bolden, is here to moderate our panel and to introduce our first speaker. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks very much. And I will say to everybody here who is here, and I'm going to ask you who you are. Okay, so we're going to take a few minutes of introduction. Don't worry, I'm not going to have you stand up and give your name or anything like that, but this is my first time on this side of the audience. So I'm really going to enjoy it. So if it looks like I'm having too much fun, it's because there are no members here, I don't think. I've been looking around to find some. I spoke with Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson as she was leaving. She's one of my favorite, and so I'm glad I did have an opportunity to see her. But just out of curiosity, how many of you are staffers? And how many are business people? And how many don't know exactly what you do? Okay. What are the other categories that I missed here? Who are experts in the field, like policy analysts and that kind of stuff? Okay. And you represent organizations? The reason I'm asking is because we just want to know whether we should take long enough, keep you from happy hour, just how long. So that's the reason we were asking. My job, though, as Jen said, I'm Charlie Bolden. I'm a Marine, so I spent 34 years on active duty in the Marine Corps. One of my mentors is in the back. He is the regent at the Potomac Institute, and my boss, General Al Gray. So General Gray, thank you very much for coming out and allowing me to have an opportunity to do some of this. He's the gentleman who tried to make us seem like we were intelligent when other people thought that there was not a lot of intelligence in the Marine Corps. So we all owe that to him, and he's the founder of the Commandant's reading list and other kinds of things that have really helped to bring young Marines, old and new, into the 21st century. So I thank you for all that you did for us. It's my job, however, to introduce the keynote speaker for today, and it's Mr. Mike Bevan. Mike is the Director of Commercial Space Policy at the National Space Council. Before joining the National Space Council at the White House, he held various senior policy positions on congressional committees at federal departments and industry associations, including the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the Department of Commerce, the Federal Aviation Administration at NASA, the Satellite Industry Association, and the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So if you would, please join me in welcoming Mike with a warm welcome.
Thanks, Charlie, for that the kind introduction. I really appreciate that. One of the other things I always put on my bio too is I live in Virginia with my family, and that's my wife, my 4 kids, and that's really the thing I'm most proud of. But I'd like to thank the Potomac Institute for hosting this event and for inviting me to come speak on this important topic. If we could just pull my slides up, I got about 65 slides that we need to get through. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I wouldn't do that to you guys on a Friday afternoon, first day of summer. But we're here to talk about LEO commercialization and how it will facilitate the successful efforts of NASA and our international partners in exploration, not just in LEO, but to the moon and this time to stay, and then on to Mars. But before we get into some of the details, I'd like to address one policy conundrum that I've been wrestling with in space policy for over 20 years here. And there always seems to be this debate about, what is truly commercial, right? And we put, the hands up. And we tie ourselves into knots to try to explain it from one particular view or another. But the reality is that it's a very wide spectrum to commercialization. There's no pristine formula etched in a stone tablet somewhere that Laura Croft is going to discover. It takes many forms in all sectors of our economy, and space is no different. But in space, we've actually been at this for a while, and this isn't the beginning. It's Jennifer alluded to earlier. We currently enjoy enormous benefits from both our commercial and international partners in space, and we know how to do this. Commercial Dragon and Cygnus capsules already transport cargo to the ISS. Soon Dragon and Starliner capsules will do the same for astronauts. NASA's just released a new commercial use policy for ISS, thank you, and has plans for free flyers, port selection, microgravity R&D, commercial cargo and logistics support to the gateway, commercial landers on the moon, etc., and those are all soon to follow. And this is the right thing to do. The cold hard fact is the ISS is going to end at some point, and we need to continue this transition that we've been doing for a while now onto what's next, what'll come after that. And all these initial steps are important bricks in the wall, right? But we're not building a wall. What we're doing here, all of us here, we're building this cathedral, if you will. Are you guys familiar with the story of the 3 stone masons? They're asked, what are you doing? The first one says, I'm laying bricks. Second one says, I'm putting up a wall. And the third one responds, with pride in his voice, I'm building a cathedral. And that's what we can't lose sight of, that bigger picture. And it's an economy that supports and enables sustainable exploration from the Earth to the surface of the moon and then on to Mars. That's really what we're talking about. And just to paraphrase one of the great space policy communicators of our time, Dave Chappelle. Does everybody know who Dave Chappelle is? Hands up. Well, way back in 2004, he portrayed the president on his Comedy Central show, and he declared from the podium, much like this one, I ain't stopping at the moon. Write this down, M-A-R-S, Mars. There's some other words in there. That's where we're going. So I'll pause for a second while you guys jot that down. Does anybody need me to spell it again? Jeff, Faust? No? It's M-A-R-S. The S is at the end. But seriously, the time is now. The president knows that Americans are not satisfied with the status quo and that the future is open only to those brave enough to seize it. The great explorers of the past did not stop after a few expeditions, never to return, but it requires both bold leadership and tough decisions. While NASA directed almost every element of the Apollo program, today we have a diverse array of space-capable entities across both commercial and international domains, much like Jennifer was saying earlier. And we have to tap every resource if we're to fully realize a future with American leadership and values in space. As Bill Gerstenmaier, NASA's Associate Administrator for HEO, recently said, we need to think of a different way of doing business. And this is true not just in HEO, but across NASA and the rest of the US government as well. All of our efforts must build a continuum that sustains exploration out from LEO to the surface of the moon and onto Mars. Now, a great example in the near term is the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. The NASA Science Mission Directorate recently announced 3 commercial partners that could send payloads to the moon, and this could start as early as next year. Another example is the Gateway's PPE, or power and propulsion element. NASA's not procuring the PPE itself, but rather supporting the construction and launch of the module, followed by a year of in-space testing. At the end of testing, NASA has the option to acquire the PPE for the Gateway, but a similar approach could be used for free flyers in LEO, with additional PPEs and modules offered as a commercial service. So how do we proceed? NASA is poised to lead with commercial and international partners in the design and development of a lunar field station at the moon's south pole. Well, what are the capabilities that the commercial sector could provide beyond, say, landers for cargo and crew? Could commercial services provide crew habitation, solar and nuclear power generation, surface mobility, resource extraction, etc.? Some concepts for building a planetary field station come from NASA's current plans for human missions to Mars. And building on that foundation, we should design the lunar architecture in such a way that it feeds commercial services forward to enable exploration beyond the moon. So if you'll permit me, I'd like to come back to the bricks in the wall analogy and reiterate that all of these pieces are interlinked from LEO out to the moon, on the surface of the moon, and onto Mars. The idea here is that each individual brick builds up the walls and then ultimately the cathedral. A robust economy will develop, not overnight, but in the fullness of time it will. In doing so, we'll be better equipped to sustainably expand human presence beyond LEO to the surface of the moon and lay the foundations to continue on to Mars. With that, I'd like to thank the Potomac Institute again for organizing this event. I believe this particular topic is what's key to sustainable space exploration. So thank you.
If I can ask the three panelists to come up and take your place at the table, we'll start some discussion here. I'm going to let you all slip behind me if you need it. Okay, if we get this working right, I think that's okay. Can you hear me back there, Ann? That's okay. All right. We've got, as I said, three representatives from three pretty diverse areas when you start talking about commercial space and commercialization of low Earth orbit. And what I've asked each of them to do is take about 3 to 5 minutes with some opening remarks. And you know, 3 to 5 minutes is DC time, so it will be loose. But I want them to give you their perspective on commercial spaceflight and commercialization. And one of the things I'd like for you all to think about, because we're gonna close today with a good period of time dedicated to you asking questions. And if so, think about them as you go along. There are 2 rules. Although I said we're going to do it at the end. If you have a burning question while one of them is talking, do me a favor, just raise your hand and we'll ask the question. I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm old enough now that if I have a question, I better ask it right now, or that question will be lost. So if there are any of you who are similar or so inclined, please feel free to ask the question. The second rule is there are no dumb questions. If you have a question, then I can guarantee you there are several other people sitting in this audience who have the same question. And in fact, it may be a question that I wish I had written down on my piece of paper to ask them. So I encourage you, you won't get anything out of this if you don't participate. I can guarantee you that. If all you do is come and listen, you're going to get nothing from it. We're looking for ideas from you as much as we are here to kind of be the seeds of your thinking about some things. So let me introduce the 3 panelists. I'll make it pretty quick, and then I'll ask Carrie down on the end to start us off. But Carrie Timmons represents Lockheed Martin. She is currently the LEO Commercialization Program Management Lead at Lockheed Martin Space. Carrie's, she's got a wide variety of experience, but she's now considered to be the Program Management Lead for NASA's LEO commercialization, if I understand that correctly. So she's doing a lot of the studies that are going on in Lockheed Martin, as well as activities that are related to in-space manufacturing and assembly. So if you want to ask a question about how old space. And I hate these terms, but I'm going to use them and get them out there so you can feel free to use it if you're comfortable. Carrie probably hates me for saying this, as young as she is, but she unfortunately represents old space to some of you. She joined Lockheed Martin in 2004, and her previous job experience includes systems engineering tasks in support of design, development, and the test of the Orion avionics, power, and wiring systems. She has a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado and an MS in mechatronics from the University of Denver. And believe it or not, I had to travel all the way to Jordan to learn what mechatronics was. And so welcome. The second person to speak will be Jeffrey Manber. Jeffrey is, he represents a totally different animal, if you will, from any of the four of us up here. So Jeffrey is very unique, and I think you'll see that as we go along with the discussion. I regard him as a pioneer in bringing about robust commercial space exploration program that we have today. One where the private sector contributes as much as the government. His goal is, and he tells me this, his goal has long been to make space just another place to do business. He's the CEO of NanoRacks, LLC, and he's been in that position since 2009, and he steered the growth of NanoRacks from a garage space to where NanoRacks is today. They are no longer in a garage space. In fact, can I mention where you're growing, or should I let you do that? Yeah, I'll let you talk about it. That's all right. A couple of other things, and it's just, he's the first person to own and operate on ISS, his company having their own stuff, if you want to put it that way. So not NASA, not big business, but a small entrepreneurial company that became the first to own and market their own hardware on the space station. His company has deployed over 200 satellites from the space station, and among the things he's done is he included the first customer on board the space station from China. And I'm going to ask you later. That's all right. You're in a good place. You're in a good place. I have been chewed out in this very room more times for talking about that. So I'm going to ask you how. In fact, my question over here that I want you to think about: how the heck did you negotiate this with the U.S. Congress in light of the Wolf Amendment? Don't answer now, but you can spend some time on that later. Earlier, he was the CEO of Mir Corp, which leased Russian space station Mir, and he oversaw the first ever and still only commercially funded manned mission of over 70 days to the Mir space station when he signed Mark Burnett of Survivor. I could go on talking about Jeffrey, but I won't. I will just say he's the author of several books, at least two, and the one that I think I like the best is one that's called Selling Peace. And you might ask him, where does the title come from and what the heck does he mean by that? So Jeffrey Manber. And then the final presenter will be Doug Comstock. And Truth in Lending, Doug and I have been partners in crime for a long time. When I came back to NASA in 2009 to be the NASA administrator, Doug was there, and he was doing numbers for us. He was really in charge of trying to do cost analysis and stuff that's really, really hard. Any of you do that right now for your own companies? We got any cost analysts in here? You shake your head because we're gonna use a term later on called business case. Who's heard of a business case? Old Space has definitely heard about it. Okay. But the cost analyst tries to help us understand, do we have a business case at all, or are we really going to go out here and put all of our money in this and pray? You should pray even if you have a good business case, but you should have a good business case. So Jeff today, although he works for the Doug, Jeff? Yeah. Doug. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Doug today, although he is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for Integration at NASA headquarters, he's detailed on an assignment to NASA's Human Exploration Operations Mission Director, we affectionately call HEO. So he's the HEO Commercial LEO Liaison. And in this role, his focus now is NASA's Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate development of how do we communicate, or how do they communicate, an integrated strategy for maximizing the potential for growth of commercial activities in low Earth orbit, or LEO. Doug was previously, as I mentioned, the Director of Cost Analysis Division, the Office of Evaluation at NASA headquarters, and he was actually a part of the Office of the Administrator before the Office of the Administrator, and I don't know whether I did it or whether my predecessor did it, it's not important, but we did away with it. We wish we hadn't when I was there later on, but anyway, that's one of those things you do and then you go back and regret it. He has also been the director of NASA's Innovative Partnership Program, or IPP as it's referred to, responsible for directing the IPP portfolio of technology investments and partnering mechanisms, including small business innovative research, small business technology transfer research, and centennial challenges in the Innovative Partnerships Seed Fund. So that's a kind of a thumbnail sketch of our three presenters, and I'm going to ask you, Carrie, if you'd kick us off with just some thoughts of yours on commercial space and commercialization.
Sure. Is this good? Can you hear me all right? All right, so I really got involved in this kind of middle to late last year when we supported NASA's LEO commercialization study. And it was such a cool experience. It was a lot different than the things we normally do. And here's your requirement set, go build this. It was, what do you want the vision, what's your vision of the future? How do you want space to look 5, 10, 15 years from now? And we approached it with this mindset kind of from 3 angles. Okay, what does it look like now, and how much does it cost? What's the model we're using? And then how does that evolve? What does ISS or a future space station, future free flyer even, look like? And then how do we energize the commercial market and companies and partners to really get engaged, bring their money and their ideas to space? So the last part is especially exciting for us because we have a lot of in-space manufacturing and assembly technologies that we're maturing. I mean, we are a tech company with a lot of experience in robotics, autonomy, and we're learning more every day about artificial intelligence and machine learning. These things are going to be the infrastructure that enable commercialization in the future. So we're really excited about supporting that aspect of commercial space and how do we build up the infrastructure that buys down the risk and enables commercial partners and investors to bring more applications, products, and goods to commercial space.
Thanks a lot. Jeffrey?
Oh my God, she kept it to 3 minutes.
I'm from Denver,
Okay.
Denver time.
If I'm the only one, if I'm the only one with slides, I can forego
No,
the slide.
you're not
Okay.
the only one.
Oh.
You can go.
I should have brought slides.
Okay, well then, first off, thank you for the introduction, Charlie. I am Jeff Manber, CEO of NanoRacks. I'd like to begin, first off, let me say that this hurts me a little bit to do, but I really want to say we're at a beautiful place now, policy-wise. And you know, for those of us who have been struggling for many years now to get NASA and to get the government to behave as a customer, this is really exciting because more and more the government is behaving as a customer. And so, you know, Carrie was talking about technology. It's also, of course, about the policy and where we are because it's still a market in its infancy. Next slide, please. I like to begin, and when Charlie challenged me on what to talk about, I decided I'd like to begin with really is what our proudest thing at NanoRacks, our customers. And we are the largest commercial user of the International Space Station. Son of a gun. I mean, we have customers in over 30 countries. And as Mike was saying earlier, there's this endless battle in this town as to what is commercial. And for me, we have NASA as a customer. We have European Space Agency as a customer. It's commercial because we designed the hardware. It was our capital at risk. And if we don't produce, oh, you know, we're in trouble. And we live at NanoRacks still from launch to launch. It's not an easy business. But we're growing very rapidly thanks to the customers and the policy changes on the station. Next slide. And when Charlie also challenged me, I wanted to just take a moment and say one of the most interesting things happening is the maturing of the public-private partnership. When we started NanoRacks 10 years ago, as Charlie said and used the technical term stuff, we were the first company to own and market our own stuff on the space station. And NASA didn't really know what to do with that. They were like, why should we let you have a price? Why should we let you set a price? Why should we let you keep the money? And there were fierce battles in 2009 as to how a private company could be on a taxpayer platform, charge our own prices, keep the revenue. And since then, we've had, I think, 4 or 5 Space Act agreements, and each one is growing in maturity. Probably it's going to change soon with the commercial platforms coming out and other policy changes. But as of today, NanoRacks has the most capital committed on the station, private capital. We're at 40 to 50 million. And we're building an airlock and a commercial airlock called Bishop, and all that's private capital. And so we've matured, NASA has matured, and it's because, in large part, by those of you here in Congress that have wanted to see the private sector unleashed in LEO. Next slide. And one of the, what we're looking at in the future, Mike talked about commercial platforms, one attached to the station, one free flyer, and we're looking at different ways to have cost efficiencies. As Mike said, the station will not be there forever. As I like to remind my congressional friends and colleagues, it's not up to them. It's a living thing, the station, and you know, it's 20-something years old. I don't know what that is in dog years or people years, but my background, I lived through an aging space station called the Mir, and they age as they wish, and it's wonderful. We have bipartisan support for the station to continue for the next decade, but it's not up to us. It's up to the, you know, it's a machine, and we should be ready and we should be prepared so we never have a gap like we did with the shuttle. And I welcome us taking the first baby steps today and figuring out how do we work with NASA, how do we work with foreign competition and space agencies. You know, I worry as much what my competitors are doing in town as I do what Jackson, maybe in ESA and other non-ISS space agencies are doing. So today is the time for us to figure this all out. And it's a very exciting time, and if we get this right, we'll have American leadership far into the next few decades in the way we do it best, with the private sector leading the way. So I think that's about it. I think the next slide is my thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And Doug, you did the closer.
Thanks, Charlie.
Sort of. Actually, the opener.
And thanks to the Potomac Institute for hosting this event. And I want to share a few thoughts on what NASA's doing. And we just released a couple of weeks ago a strategy on an approach to developing the low Earth orbit economy. And let's go to the next slide. Back one. And maybe just a thought first on the definition of commercial. And part of the way I think about it is others have mentioned, it's not a black and white definition. It's a continuum, and at one end you have sort of the traditional government contract where it's a cost-plus contract and all the risk is on the government, and the government is the only customer. At the other end, space products and services become commoditized. So that could be like communication satellites where you can buy bandwidth or buy access to a transponder, and you have a fixed price and you just buy it as a commodity. And there's a whole lot of variations and steps in between those 2 points, but it really is a continuum, and for different sorts of services, we're at different points along the continuum. But I think we're trying to move towards the direction that's more the truly commercial, where you're purchasing commodities. And in some cases, we still have a long ways to go, but we're working to get there. And this is a vision for the framework for how we envision low Earth orbit, particularly with regard to the International Space Station, and how that transition can happen over the next decade or so. And you know, right now, the station is an amazing capability that's been up there for 20 years, and as Jeff said, we've got commercial activities up there. NanoRacks was the first one. We've now got commercial facilities, 14 different commercial facilities that have been built by 11 different companies that are operational on the ISS. So great work paving the path, and we've got a lot of others following and some robust activities now. But as we've talked about also, at some point, station is going to be aged and we're not going to have a station anymore, we want to position the agency and the country to not have a gap in capability for human access to LEO. And this strategy talks about how we get there. And we want to have commercial destinations in LEO in the future where NASA can purchase services as one of many customers for those services. And we want to make sure that we have a transition period with a handoff where we manage the risk and only deorbit the space station when it's time to do so, and then we have confidence that the commercial capabilities are going to be there and have been proven out, and those markets are beginning to mature. And that framework is sort of laid out here. And I'll talk about in some detail about the activities we have in the lower left, the near-term activities. Let's go to the next slide. Back one. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the context for this historically, and the whole transition to commercial activities in low Earth orbit, when you think about it, is really a multi-decade transition. And we're already a couple of decades into it. If you look back at the beginning of the commercial cargo activities with the COTS competition, in 2005 we started that out. We now have robust capabilities for routine delivery of cargo from 2 commercial providers, and we've got a 3rd one in development. And we started Commercial Crew after that, and through Charlie's tenure at NASA, we made a lot of progress in developing these capabilities. And the International Space Station was designated as a national lab by Congress also in 2005, and we began having commercial activities, as Jeff mentioned, and you can see a lot of commercial facilities up there now. And all these things are beginning to come together, so it's a real exciting time because we're soon going to have the ability to deliver commercial cargo and commercial astronauts to the space station and begin to try out some new markets that really haven't been able to been pursued before. So let's go to the next slide. And this just sort of lays out the 5 elements of the plan. Trigger happy back there. The plan, and I brought some copies with me that are on the table out front of the summary of the plan here. But it's also available on the website. If you just go to nasa.gov/LEO economy, it'll take you to all the details of the plan. But there's a 5-point plan that we've laid out that in the near term is intended to really help develop these markets. And we talk about business plans, and at the root of it, all these activities are intended to reduce uncertainty associated with these business plans. Because the worst thing you can have in a business plan is uncertainty. You want to know what your market is, you want to know who the customers are, how much things are going to cost. So one of the first things we did is establish a commercial use policy, and Christy Cox, who's here with us today, was a key enabler in getting that through NASA and getting it in place. So we have expanded the types of commercial activities that we can do on space station, and we can move into manufacturing, which is beyond the current role of the ISS National Lab. We can do things like companies can shoot commercials on the space station. We can have trinkets manufactured, and we can do all sorts of things now. And we also have prices associated with those. And the pricing is sort of an experiment where we set prices initially, and we want to understand how the market reacts to those. We're going to share this information with industry so they can begin to have insights into how the market reacts to different prices, which will inform their business plans for developing these commercial destinations. And as the market responds, we'll adjust those prices, and those will further inform, I think, reduce the uncertainty that industry has in putting together their business cases for these commercial destinations. We've also announced that we're going to enable private astronaut missions to the International Space Station. And we're soon to have capabilities from both Boeing and SpaceX to deliver NASA astronauts, and those capabilities will be able to be purchased on a private basis to have missions that would go commercially to the space station with private astronauts. And we've already begun to plan the accommodation of those missions with the planning for the space station. We can accommodate up to 2 missions per year for about 30 days for those missions, and the first one could potentially be as early as October of 2020 if Boeing and SpaceX are ready to go at that point. So that's pretty exciting to open up the opportunity for that market segment. Another thing that we're doing is working on the supply side, and we want to have these commercial destinations after space station And NASA wants to work with industry in partnership, much the way we have with commercial cargo and commercial crew, to partner with industry to develop these commercial destinations. And so we're going to have two paths to do that. One, using the Node 2 forward port on the space station to have a commercial module dock and begin to test out and demonstrate some of the markets. And we're also going to pursue a path that would go directly to a free flyer. And we're expecting to release the solicitation for the node use actually today. We're going to be releasing the solicitation for the free flyer in a month or so after that. So we're building on the experience that we've had already with commercial crew and commercial cargo, and applying that similar approach to developing these commercial destinations, where in the future, just as we're now purchasing services for cargo, we will be purchasing services for crew. We want to purchase services for all the research activities and technology demonstrations that we do in low Earth orbit. And the fourth element of the plan is to work with industry to try to stimulate demand. This is a huge area of uncertainty, and this is something that all the studies identified as an area. There's estimates all over on what these new markets may be, and because they're new markets, there's a lot of uncertainty. So we want to work with industry, make the space station available to begin demonstrating these new markets, reduce that uncertainty, and help build the business case that industry needs to develop these commercial destinations. And finally, NASA is going to be a customer in the future. We want to buy services for our R&D needs, for our technology demonstration needs. So we put forward a white paper that quantified what NASA is going to need as a customer from these commercial destinations once they're available. So all of those activities are really focused on helping industry build a business case, reducing uncertainty from the markets, from NASA as a customer, and help them to develop the systems that are going to be needed in a post-ISS world. And this ties together also for our exploration plans, because we anticipate that industry will be able to provide the sort of R&D services and technology demonstration services in LEO that the agency needs at a much more efficient cost than NASA currently does with the ISS. So we anticipate that will be able to free up resources that we can put towards the next thing at Moon and onto Mars, and help industry in the process begin to develop this low Earth orbit economy, which will create new jobs and new industries in space. So that's sort of what NASA is hoping to achieve with our vision for the low Earth orbit economy and this 5-point plan that we just announced.
Thank you. Let me kind of kick off the questions here. One of the things that I'm not sure how many of you have given any thought of it, who are out there thinking about being entrepreneurs, but everything new has barriers. So Jeffrey, let me ask you to start out, but since you've probably seen every barrier that we could possibly put up there.
Not yet. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure
true.
there's more.
But you've already mentioned one thing that I suspect you're going to talk about, which is regulation. So can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers, the common barriers to entry that almost every company will run into, whether you're large or small?
Well, Charlie, I may disappoint you right from the outset. I don't want to focus it just on regulatory. The gradual transition over the last several decades has been a policy, a regulatory shift. 25 years ago, NASA was the sole voice in the government for civilian space, and that was just plain wrong, and a lot of us thought it was 25 years ago or longer. And during the Reagan administration, folks were able to get the FAA involved on regulating launch vehicles, which is the proper role of the FAA. Why should NASA be in charge of launch vehicles and policy? And then I helped set up the Office of Space Commerce, which has been sort of dormant. Now it seems to be rising up with Kevin. And so it's not only the regulatory, it's the entire framework of how we are doing the transition. But if you're an entrepreneur 5, 7, 8 years ago, you at least knew with the launch vehicle where you should go for the agencies. Before that, you didn't even know. The first launch vehicle was Conestoga with Deke Slayton. Yeah. And it was, in the 80s or something, and they said it took months and months and months, just like Moon Express, in getting the first license to go to the moon or something. I'm not sure what they got. But so Charlie's right that we face a lot of regulatory hurdles. If you have anything today that has a camera, even if it's not germane to your mission, you have to go to, you know, you have to get the license, the camera, you know, from the FCC, and it can be backed up for quite some time. And so regulations are one part of it, but it's changing, and it's not, the regulations are not the determining factor, it's more market. As Doug is saying, it's, do we have a glut of launch vehicles now is another problem, and so it's not only regulatory.
Okay. Terry, Carrie, another question is, how do we've got to have a community. If we're serious about commercialization of LEO, you know, one company, two companies does not make the infrastructure, the sustainable infrastructure. So noticing that you're working with in-space manufacturing and things like that, what's Lockheed's approach, or what's Carrie's approach to trying to build this community? How do you represent Lockheed, recognizing the fact that you've got to go out and get some partners or some competitors in order to get you know, the right mass to make anything happen?
Sure, absolutely. This is definitely going to require collaboration. It's not going to be just kind of like established space as opposed to old space. But no, it's old space and the new space, working in partnership with the government. And I think NASA's done a lot of things through their Next Step program with the public-private partnership and expecting commercialization and some in-kind contributions, and really making those expectations clear and to level that playing field. So I've also been working on the Gateway program and our Next Step studies associated with that. And we've been working with several partners, including NanoRacks, at our prototype development at KSC, and figuring out what do we need to put in place so that this works for both of us, so that we can each make our business case close. Because it's got to be a win-win situation all around the board. So us reaching out to the commercial companies and them not turning us away, like, you're old space, we don't want to work with you. Yeah. Just continuing to be open-minded in this new world.
And it works both ways. Thank you for being open-minded about working with little companies. Yes, it works both ways.
Doug, you've been around this stuff for a while, and I mentioned the fact that you were in cost analysis before. For a startup out here, you know, what kind of things were you looking at in terms of trying to help them build their business case, help them understand what a business case really is? What are the factors that go into it? How do you, what do you tell them to do?
Can I just ask a question?
You can.
Modify that so we won't repeat it. A business case for Doug, and correct me in your answer what I stated wrong, is different than a business case for new space from old space. It's all based about money and the timelines expected to pay back, and the vision that's articulated to weigh the risk, so that you can have your money people, whether it's Congress or whether it's investors or stockholders, to do that. But so could each of you talk about that aspect of it as Doug?
And I was not asking Doug to talk about building a business case, because NASA doesn't have to build a business case, and I don't know, you all can disagree with me or agree or whatever. The fact that we didn't have, you know, government doesn't have to build a business case. There is no,
Only if government wants to have a policy and a program to enable industry.
And that's the point I was trying to get to. What lessons has he learned in his various positions at NASA in helping him to understand what a business case is? Because it's easy for, you know, like, we could, anyway, I'll let him answer the question.
General, thank you for your service both with NASA.
No, thank you. I had fun. Never worked a day in my life.
Well, one of the things about cost analysis, and it's, I think, similar to what industry does when they're building a business case, and I spent 15 years in the private sector before I came to government service, but it's all related to uncertainty. And when you talk about a cost estimate for something, you know, there's a tendency to identify that as a point estimate, but the only thing you know is that point estimate is wrong. And there are uncertainties associated with that. There are risks associated with all sorts of things, and the way you really develop a robust cost estimate is to understand all those risks and accommodate those risks in your analysis. Same kind of thing with a business plan. You know, the objective is to identify markets and customers and sell things for more than it costs you to produce them. but there's uncertainties associated with what it's going to cost you to produce those things. There's uncertainties associated with who the customers are, with what you're going to charge, and so on. So part of what NASA is trying to do is not tell industry how to do their business plans, but identify where there are uncertainties that NASA can help reduce. And that's part of what we're trying to do with a number of elements of these 5-point plans. And it's up to industry to go and mature and develop those markets. What NASA's trying to do is set the table and turn industry loose on these challenges, but it's up to industry to make it happen.
Can I make a point, Charlie?
You can. In fact, I was going to ask you a question, but you make your point first.
A few
may
months.
answer the question.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a few months ago, we looked into the history of aviation, and I was struck by how much what we're struggling to do here now is not unique. And it's sort of the American way, and I found out there really was a Mr. Boeing, and there really was a Mr. Northrop, and there was a Mr. Grumman. Yes, they were all misters, but they needed Congress, and they had a 10-year exclusive monopolies on aviation, and they weren't making enough money, and so Congress gave them more money. And then I found out that I didn't know any of this, that Boeing owned United, and then they got so successful, they were split apart. So I just want to make the point, as with all of you are involved in this, that with everything that Doug and NASA's trying to do and we're trying to do in industry, space is not the first frontier. So I just want to.
Can I add on
Go
to that?
ahead.
'Cause
Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, we recently looked into the railroad industry. Another similar
same.
parallel, but what's related but different about that is the railroad industries owned a lot of the buildings and facilities in the locations they were trying to get to.
Yeah.
So they had incentive in keeping that going. And that may be a potential model in advancing space exploration in commercial space.
I'm sure we did it for the same reason,
Probably.
the Leo paper. Yeah.
I had asked Carrie earlier about how do you build communities, but, and Carrie just alluded to something when she talked about the railroads. You talked about the glut of launch providers. I share that concern with you that everybody wants to get into at least early on, everybody wanted to have a launch vehicle. That was the thing, to be a launch vehicle provider. Well, we need places for the launch provider to go. So can you talk a little bit about the risk that you took with providing places to take people? Because you had to go through some pretty extraordinary
You're exactly.
efforts to
You're
get that.
you're exactly right. We call ourselves at NanoRacks a destination company. And for the past 7, 8, 9, I think we helped the CubeSat market develop. We deployed the first satellites just about a planet, the first satellites Aspire, first satellites of GomSpace. We helped that market take place, and then people saw its demand, then the capital flowed into launch vehicles. And now we have this extraordinary liquidity and capital for launch vehicles. We have this robustness we've never had, which is wonderful. I do have some fear of the fallout. I mean, you just do the math. If all these folks are flying the once a month that they say, and they're flying 40, 50, 60 times a year, they're not all going to make it. And you throw in international service providers as well. So we have struggled to raise capital in the past. People say, Jeff, if only you were a launch vehicle. It's like, you know, Jeff, if only you're a Constellation, you know. Well, we're not. We're a destination. And what's so important about what NASA has announced is that now it shows folks new to the community that it's the position of the United States government that destinations are important as well, and they will be treated much the same way. But we have had a difficult time, and we're self-financed in NanoRacks, and part of that is because everybody was putting money into launch vehicles, and so now that's changing. But I do worry about two things, if I may. One, what's the repercussions of all these launch vehicles coming onto the market? And it's good in that it lowers prices, but there will be failures, commercial failures. And secondly, one thing here, I worry that now NASA believes in commercial so much, they think it's going to be billions of dollars in revenue in LEO. Newsflash, it's not. Okay, I mean, you know, I worry that there's this belief that the LEO market The way the ISS is, maybe I'm taking up too much time here quickly, the ISS is controlled by so many people, Japanese, Europeans, Canadians, the private sector, NASA, so many different things that the commercialization of media branding, it's going to be difficult to extract optimal revenue. So we have to be realistic. That's
Choke point then, shortfall of spaceports, or is it just the fact that, when you talk about there being a plethora of launch vehicles, is there a need for more launch locations, dedicated to commercial only?
Right now, most of these are dedicated to CubeSat and SmallSat, and I just don't see, just me speaking, I don't see the constellations coming along. SpaceX and stuff are self-launching, and you have OneWeb. They're even doing a lot of U.S., non-U.S. I don't think it's the spaceports. We just have to see the demand for constellations or destinations. I'd like to see 10 space stations in the next 10 years. That would help.
Yeah.
First off, Harry, if you're old space, I'm not too sure what I am. I remember deep blues out of White Six.
I've read about them.
That's going back there. Also, one of my favorite movies is called Wall-E. And you understand what Wall-E was, to a large extent, about was contamination both of the planet and contamination of low Earth orbit. Key component of your business case is going to have to be, how do you commercialize low Earth orbit without messing up low Earth orbit? Any comments on how you would propose to do that? Because there's going to be a cost, either one we pay today or one we pay my grandkids.
For the benefit of the audience, the question was around what are any of these companies or NASA, what are they doing to consider orbital debris? Contamination of low Earth orbit, what's in the plan, or what should we be thinking about if we don't have a plan? And paying. Okay, so.
At NanoRacks, most of our satellites deploy low enough that they come back in on their own after about 9 months to a year. I am concerned by the higher LEO orbits and all that constellations, but we're not in that zone yet.
But
Yeah.
you're in the community, so what does the community have to do?
That's your question.
Yeah, I think we have been thinking about that, and the hard part is you can't make the business case close there. There's not somebody paying to clean up lower Earth orbit, just in the reality of it, right? So that's maybe where regulation or policy comes in to help keep us all honest.
One of the things that was done, well, I'll get this right, at least there is a convention now. It's not a law, but it's a convention that if you launch something, you've got to provide enough propellant to either safely deorbit it into a nice, safe place in the ocean somewhere, or kick it up to a parking orbit where it stays for several hundred years. And for the most part, I think most people comply with that. But your question is one that I can remember sitting around the table with the Secretary of the Air Force and somebody representing the national security arena and me, and we all said, what's our most critical problem? And everybody says orbital debris. And we said, who's going to take the lead? And then everybody looks at their checkbook and says, well, let's defer that to the next meeting. That's just a fact of life, and that's unsustainable. So that is a critical question that we have. An encouraging thing is to see kids start to think about really innovative ways to build a spacecraft that can go out and do a James Bond, eat it up, or drag a big magnet through space or something. Those are probably things that are not, but people are thinking about it anyway. There's a young man right back here. Question.
Going off that question, I was wondering if you believe that our current framework for sovereignty territory jurisdiction is going to need some kind of amending so that we're better equipped to take on these kinds of challenges like deorbiting regulation or even adjudicating extraterrestrial territorial disputes?
That's a mouthful. Anybody want to take that one? Did everybody understand the question? Let me try to, I think I understood the question is, are we doing something, or who is doing something to regulate, Congress passed a law that said, okay, anybody that wants to go out and sit on an asteroid and mine it, that's yours. Not the asteroid, but the property is yours. Is there an effort underway internationally today to make that an accepted convention or a law? Did I get it close? Okay.
One of the exciting things for me personally is seeing the emergence of space nodes, I might say, regulatory. Of course, you have it in Luxembourg now, very proactive. And you have it in other places where, and you have that, whether in shipping, where I can be a convenience of flag, and I think we're going to start to see that in space, where Luxembourg is trying very hard, UK is trying very hard, UAE. I mean, the emergence of UAE in the next few years, they're going to be a major player in commercial and civil with their Mars program and other things. So for me, it's encouraging. As long as we get it right, as a question on like orbital debris, as long as there's not one flag you can do where you don't have to worry about orbital debris. But in theory, it's a good thing that there's emerging different locations of expertise.
Question right here.
Yeah, I have a two-parter.
Okay, and you can direct it to a specific person or to the panel in general.
The first is a specific question for Mr. Manberg. Do you have any plans on making your company publicly traded?
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. There's such excitement towards commercial space now, and we've watched as some of our colleagues have gone public. GomSpace, Sky, and I can't think of it now, in Australia. We also watch how their senior management spends then 80% of their time dealing on regulatory issues. I'll answer candidly. If folks here start to go public and it becomes a means of raising capital, then it may be a way for us as we grow to go, us and others. Right now it's happening in Europe, it's happening in Australia, and I watch as my friends are spending all their times with lawyers. And so it's not something, yes, sorry against lawyers, I mean, just.
And for the second question, how does one actually make a profit from being in low Earth orbit as a private company?
Okay, in the early days, NASA used to say to me, we're not sure philosophically if we should allow a company to be able to make a profit using the taxpayers' hardware. And I would argue and say it's the American way. Now I go back to my friends at NASA and say, I'm still trying to make that profit. I mean, so, no, but NanoRacks has been profitable because we are not existing on venture capital. We've been profitable for the last 7 years. And the way we do it is the way, to my shock, Doug said it. Doug said the right philosophy. You keep your expenses lower than your revenue. And so that is exactly correct. And I say that all the time. People look at me like, wow, you know. So that we don't grow. We can't go into all the things we want to go to. Right now, my Bishop airlock is taking up most of it, but that's the way you stay profitable.
A question for the audience, and then I'm going to get to you. Jeff has kind of hinted at this a couple of times. What's your response? All of you are taxpayers, so how would you respond to your fellow taxpayer who says, why should my tax dollars go to supporting a private entity that's going to make money and I'm not going to see any of it in return? For those of you who are enthusiasts, anybody got an answer? Right back there, young. Hold on. They want to record this, so make sure you get the mic.
I'd say it's a valid question. I think being protective of your tax dollars and being reminded that while the government has, you know, a quote-unquote sort of unlimited pool of money that they can grab from, it's not really theirs. I think that that's a valid point. However, I would say that innovation pays dividends, that moving further and going beyond and discovering new things, and I mean, there's just so many resources in space, and the idea that we're just going to sort of stay on this lifeless rock, or a rock that will eventually become lifeless at some point. That's just anyway. But I just think that innovation pays dividends, and at the end of the day, someone's got to make that investment. And if we're all doing it, it's going to cost us a hell of a lot less in the long run.
Any additions from the panel? Because I promised a question right here.
As I say, we spend a lot of time here on the Hill, and one of the charts that we show is how many jobs our customers have now in commercial space, just the NanoRacks customers, and it's wonderful to see, and we just track it. So,
I will comment. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, that with the strategy we've laid out, NASA's sort of taken the long view on this. And we expect that when we have the commercial infrastructure that we hope to in a decade or so, that we'll be saving money for doing the things that we want in low Earth orbit, so we can place more of NASA's focus on exploration further out. Sort of turn over LEO operations to the private sector who can do it much more efficiently. And in addition, by creating this economy in low Earth orbit, you're also creating jobs, and those people and those companies pay taxes, and it comes back to the taxpayer that way as well.
And this is maybe too altruistic or cliche, but there's something about space that inspires people, and it motivates future generations. When I do public outreach events at local schools or museums, the crowds are huge, and the kids are just so engaged and so excited to hear about what we're doing. Mostly they want to know about the bathroom, but they love it.
So one last thing to add to that, I would say, is if as long as it's a commensalistic relationship or mutually beneficial, I feel like taxpayer dollars aren't necessarily being wasted if they're, as long as you're not taking away NASA resources to do that mission. If NASA's mission is still being completed, then you're just adding value overall. But my question is geared more towards Carrie, but also perhaps Doug and Jeff. You know, Jeff, you just said that the way to make money in the space is to keep your expenses low and lower than your revenues. Oh, sorry, Doug said that. NASA recently released the results from those 12 commercialization studies, but they were just sort of the one-page overviews. I wanted to ask if, Carrie, especially if you've been working on, if you were heading up that study, was there enough of a market to be profitable given what your costs were expected to be? And can you talk a little bit more about those details of, you know, what markets are you looking at, what are the bigger ones, and are you making a profit?
Yeah, so we did study that. We looked at several different business cases for different products. In-space manufacturing and assembly is where we were really focusing on that. And I'll talk a little bit about some more publicly, things that are more in the public awareness, like Z-Bland. That's a fiber optical cable that you can get a lot of advantages from manufacturing it in space. And we use that as an example to show how you could close a business case there. We're working on our own internal concepts for building up the infrastructure that supports those kind of products. So we want to buy down the risk for those companies that are doing those things and help them be profitable.
Let me just add one other thing. We've also released the executive summaries for all 12 of those studies, and they're available on the resources page if you go to the Leo Economy website.
Question?
Yes, just to continue on the question to the audience for Jeff, just to continue on the question to the audience for Jeff. Jeff just used the argument of this is just another critical infrastructure, and used the example of our current interstate system, and you know, move on and put it in the terms that the people you're having to present it to can understand. If it's you know, people that are accustomed to cruise ships, think of the port authorities. Same way, it's just a critical infrastructure. You're not paying for it, you know, but you are gaining benefit over a period of time, and you have to acknowledge that as you gain more and more benefit, you will start to pay some sort of tax for it.
I think, as I said earlier, I agree exactly. As I said earlier, this is not the first frontier. It's, you know, our frontier. And you just look at aviation. No one questions the fact that a mature industry, the U.S. government, the taxpayer, pays for the airports. I mean, and the government workers oversee regulations, safety, and where would the ticket price be if United and Southwest had to pay for, you know, the airports? So there's something, like you say, something special, and we all feel it in this room about space. There's a negative part of that. People say, wait a second, this is somehow different because it's space. But every industry that's come along, even mature ones, oil and gas, and as the government gives up lands for that, every industry has the public-private partnership in various degrees. So.
Just one other example is GPS satellites, and lots of people make money off of GPS, and those are all funded by the federal government.
Question?
Actually, if you'll forgive me, General, I have an observation, and that is that there actually is a business model that's been demonstrated in LEO. It's the business around commercial satellite imagery and the entire business that's been spawned from that. For those that were at the GeoInt conference in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago, you were among 4,000 of your closest friends. I've described it as kind of a combination of Woodstock and CCOM for satellite imagery and location-based services. That all started with subsidy. It started with a set of policies, national space policies, presidential directives, essentially, that talked about commercial satellite imagery, and then there was some critical government investment, and now that market is fully self-supporting, even though the government remains a customer. It's an international marketplace of very traditional regards, and a lot of ongoing investment and a lot of energy.
I see an old friend in the back that I'm going to put on the spot, and that's Admiral Lautenbacher, who at one time was with NOAA, or was NOAA. And can you comment on Jeffrey has talked several times about NASA finally getting it.
I didn't say it that way.
Well, but I mean, that we did.
Yes,
It
that's
took.
true. I'm just,
This is,
yes.
we're supposed to be truthful here, so we get something out of this. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen NOAA and other government agencies sort of migrate to utilization of commercially available data or commercially available, or do you see that? I should not presume.
Yes, I'm working right now with a company that is in trying to commercialize data and sell government as well as to private sector. We believe there are values for the government as well as for private sector. There are industries that need the information that we're going to gather. The problem is to change from the models that we have today of building the very large satellites, thousands of instruments on them, because we can't afford more than one $5 billion satellite every few years. So if you can do this much more inexpensively with instruments that are the size of your cell phone, for goodness sake, and if you have enough of them, you get 1,000 cell phones together, they last a long time normally, right? You don't have them all fall apart. So there's a lot of reasons why you can do things much more efficiently. And you can keep the price above, the cost of and that business. It's a business, so you have to deal with it. And there are, in our view, there are customers on both sides. So this is like any other business that's going to develop from new information, inventions, all of the creativity that people can bring to the future. You just look at the changes that we have today in our miniaturization of technical components, the reliability, all of what we have today to create this wonderful atmosphere we have around us, which is filled with electronics that make life a lot easier and a lot more better for the future.
There was a question right back, yes. So if we can get the mic there, and was there a question over here and that side? Just let me know. Okay, I'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Todd Shields, a reporter with Bloomberg News. Recently, SpaceX put up 60 satellites that cause reflections that are bothersome to astronomers. So I've been talking to astronomers who are asking, what should the policy response be? Is there any policy response? Do we care about reflectivity of satellites in low Earth orbit? Who regulates it? Thank you.
We may be out of the expert here, but does somebody want to take a shot at that, or
I'll say,
is there somebody in the room?
Yes, maybe that's...
Yeah, who happens to be a policy person in that regard. That's one of those questions we're going to have to take for the record. And like I said, when I was at the Naval Academy, I'll find out, sir. So I'll try to locate somebody who can respond to that. Are we taking notes on anything?
Could I kind of challenge the question in the sense of, why does everything have to be a policy decision? Maybe there's a technological answer to that, and this could create a new business for the technological answer. Let's talk later, I'll quote you. That's good, because I'm very quotable. I don't do anything.
Yeah, and a young right here, yes.
So first, thank you to all the panelists. You guys have been really insightful. So my name is Jeffrey Simmons, and I'm a State Department Wrangell Fellow. I'm currently in
What kind of fellow?
the State Department Wrangell Fellow.
All
Charles.
right.
Yeah.
Got it. A Wrangell fellow.
Be careful of this question.
So
No, he's a good guy.
Yeah, no,
currently, I'm
it's
interning with the
good
Committee on
question.
Homeland Security, and I'm really curious about how you safeguard national security in an enterprise where a lot of more private corporations are getting involved. And like, what happens in cases of espionage where there's a company that says, I'm just making a new company, I'm on the ISS, and they're actually being used to survey on the U.S. How do you reconcile?
Early on at NanoRacks, and as you've heard, we were the first company to own our own stuff on the station. There was some concern from Homeland Security that we were marketing to the public. And so if you're marketing to the public, and we do one of our products is a nano lab this big. And so there was concern that marketing to the public, you don't know who you're marketing to. And we actually had some very tense discussions until we said, it's harder to hide something in something this big than a huge hundreds of $million payload that we go up. That's one clever answer. In general, I can say that there is an extremely rigorous, robust procedure within NASA that NanoRacks works with to ensure our payloads. We know our payloads. We know to the centimeter and everything what's in our stuff. We work closely with the folks at NASA who work with State Department. So on the outside it may look haphazard, but it's not.
Can you tell the story of your journey to Houston when you hired the first, or you took on the first Chinese customer?
Okay, as Charlie's kind enough to say, or maybe not, as you may know, there's a prohibition put on by Congressman Wolf, now retired, to prohibit NASA and other U.S. government agencies from dealing with China in civil space activities. And about 4 years ago, I realized that this irked me. And I'm slow to realize these things, but and the reason it irked me is because our friends in Europe were working with the Chinese in space. And again, this is space should be a normal place to do business, and we were artificially tying our hands behind. And the Germans are working with the Chinese in microgravity research. The French and the Italians were working with them, and I couldn't be in the room. So the first thing I did quickly was I read the Wolf Amendment. There's something I recommend to all interns or younger people in this audience. If there's something, everyone would say to you, you can't work with China, the Wolf Amendment. You can't work with China, the Wolf Amendment. I read the Wolf Amendment. It didn't say anything about commercial. And so we went to the Obama administration. I have a long history. I worked with Russia. I helped open the door between NASA and Russia, carried over the first contract between NASA and Russia. And so the Obama people were kind enough to say, okay, try it. Don't blow it. Try and find something. And we found the Beijing Institute of Technology doing a synthetic DNA project. It had flown before, so it was not opening the door. And this administrator here was so kind. This administrator was willing to write a under the Wolf Amendment to, at the time, Republican, the chairman Culberson. And the letter from the administrator stated that NanoRacks, a commercial entity, the Chinese were paying us. There was no involvement with the PLA. There was no technology transfer. And that under the Wolf Amendment, NASA saw it as as being allowed. Then NanoRacks did something unusual in this town. Not only, we did two things. One, we sought out Representative Wolf, who was retired. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done. And through an intermediary, we told him what we were doing, and we asked permission. And the message came back, I don't like it. I don't like working with China. I have human rights concerns. But your project satisfies my amendment. Then we went to Representative Culberson, and we said the same thing, and he said, I appreciate what you're doing. And so that's how we got it through, and the doors have opened, and this administration says we don't mind. We like there being a commercial presence. And so to answer in terms of this sort of late Friday afternoon, you don't give up, you understand the policy, and you make sure competitiveness is, you stay within the law, you stay within policy, respect everybody on both sides of the aisle, and we were very, very fortunate how folks treated us in that, so thank you.
And I will just add, what Jeffrey says, for those of you who are thinking about getting into the business and somebody says you can't do something, like he said, check to find out why it is they say you can't do it, and then correct the record, because NASA continues to work with China in a number of different ways now, because we understood the intent of Congressman Wolf and the Wolf Amendment, and you find ways to satisfy their concerns so that you can get your business done. Did we get your question? Or,
Prior gentleman answered half of my question.
okay, ask
but
the other half.
The other half is, how do we balance the commercial interests with government interests, particularly as it relates to space situational awareness and RSOs?
You want to talk a little bit?
What are RSOs?
Yeah. RSOs? Okay.
As you can see, I can't answer this one.
I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't want to misspeak.
Anybody got an answer? That's two I got to go find. I apologize. We don't have the answer to the second part of the question. We're going to take maybe one or two more, one right here, okay, and then one over here. The young lady right back there. All right, so we'll do that.
So I'm studying international relations at American University, and I can't help but think that there is a sense of urgency that I don't think is like, I think a lot of people are maybe speaking around it, or maybe just everyone's aware of it, but the reality is with new frontiers, whether it is, nuclear technology or rocketry or AI or something like that, whoever gets there first and gets there the most gets to set the rules. That's just how international relations works, and that's how private industry works. And the reality is, it is in our security interest to encourage as much private sector development in space, because if we're not doing it, the Chinese are going to do it, the Russians are going to do it, the Europeans are going to do it, and maybe it won't be too bad if the Europeans do it. But I think we have to look out for American interests when we're doing this, and I think that it's just something we should always be keeping in mind, that part of the reason we're doing this is because we want to be there first so that we can be there the most.
And let me just address one aspect of that and recognize that the International Space Station is a international partnership. Its first name is international, and we work very closely with our international partners in development and operation of the ISS, and we've also coordinated this new policy with them. They're trying to develop commercial activities using the International Space Station as well. So there's certainly the aspect of competition with regard to commercial activities, but it's underscored by great collaboration and cooperation between many nations with the International Space Station.
If I may? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. While we're getting the mic to the young lady right there.
Very quickly, I've always been motivated by what I call the Louisiana effect. To this day, Louisiana has the Napoleonic Code. Okay, because who got there first in terms of Western society? It was the French. And so to this day, their legal system's different. And that motivates me to make sure some of our principal values go into space.
Hi. Is it on?
It's
Yep.
on.
Hi, my name's Gia Jadek, and I'm an undergraduate studying physics. So I love science, love space, but I felt like my education has been too theoretical and left me cravings for more practical applications, especially on the technological side. And so while I love to see the cool research going into low Earth orbit, I'm a little more curious about what you have to say about what taxpayers can expect to see from this. And so my mind first comes to the example of the Hubble telescope. One of the spin-off technologies we see today, thanks to that, is in your cell phone camera, right? And so I'm wondering, maybe if American taxpayers won't see immediate dividends from LEO commercialization, they'll see some spin-off technologies come out of this. And do you have anything in mind when you think of that, or what might we expect to see?
Can I ask you to tell me your name again? I apologize.
Me?
Yeah.
John Burlington.
Would you respond to her? You mentioned something when she started talking, and I think it's really
She said
important.
she wanted practical physics.
Yeah.
It's called engineering.
That was the first thing I wanted to say. It is one of these things that, okay, my mom wanted me to do this. I really liked it when I was growing up, but I don't feel it. And then all of a sudden, I've heard this from a lot of students who, get 3.5 years into their degree and they find out that, no, I really like making things happen. I like taking all the stuff that the scientists have done and turning it into a product or something that I feel good and is going to contribute to humankind. So that's one consideration. Now, I'll let somebody else answer your question. I just thought that was priceless.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because you're almost asking us to predict the future. What's the next killer app or killer economy, as you guys like to talk about it. So we're focused on what is that app, but how do we get there from here? How do we buy down the risk so that other companies can do that, right? If you have to build your whole satellite with propulsion and comm and power before you can even put your payload on it, then the barrier and the hurdle is so high, right? Doug talked about this earlier with all of the commercialization that we have on ISS and NASA platforms. Orion is also a NASA platform, and it even has a different environment that it can go to in deep space. And we're looking right now at how we can put payloads on that. And we actually have on our website a solicitation. We're requesting ideas from companies and the public. So I think the more you get the message out, the more ideas you have coming in, you get to those killer apps sooner.
Yeah, and currently on the International Space Station, half of the U.S. Capacity goes to the ISS National Lab, which is focused on research and development in a number of areas. So there's academic research, there's government research, not only NASA, but also NIH and NSF, and there's a lot of commercial research for R&D going on the station now through the ISS National Lab. And some of the things that are being worked on there, Z-band was already mentioned, very highly efficient fiber optics. There's a very interesting concept that develops an artificial retina that can only be produced in space, which if successful could restore vision to blind people. So, I mean, there's one example that's being worked on now. Organs on a chip are being tested in space now. So there's a host of things which are already in the pipeline, but the thing that's really exciting is we have no idea what the killer app or what the things that may come in the future will be. But given NASA's history, 60 years with spin-offs that are part of our everyday life, we know there will be some in the future.
Okay, the quick question round, and I only have 2 questions, but make your brief answers just succinct and brief. Yes, how do you envision the future of research in low Earth orbit, given that Jeffrey and I think even Doug said ISS will determine when it's not there because it's a machine. So how do you, one at a time, how do you envision the future of all this research we've been talking about that's going on the station today? How do you envision that in the future? Say the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I envision it continuing, but with even more commercial partnerships. As we look to go beyond LEO to the moon and to Mars, there are still a lot of things that we need to understand better. And I think that the LEO platforms, ISS, and maybe whatever follows it, are going to be a great, they're already great national labs, and they'll continue that work to advance our knowledge of the environment on humans, biological sciences, and technologies that we need to go farther into space.
I'm excited about us evolving into dedicated platforms for dedicated markets. The last 50, 60 years has shown us that, no offense, Mr. Administrator, Mr. Astronaut, but the guy on a bicycle does disrupt the microgravity.
I love it, I love
okay?
it.
I mean,
I've been trying to explain that to people.
Right, and so
you shake the doggone
you shake it, and yet we did this modular design. We did it for political purposes. I was there. I may have been part of the problem, but you know, we got the Russians involved. We put everything together. So what I'm looking forward to is over the next 10 years having maybe Lockheed doing a platform dedicated to in-space manufacturing, Z-band. We may be doing something in biopharma, and then there'll be hotels, and then there'll be professional astronauts, each linked by an ecosystem, but not physically linked. That's the exciting part to me.
And I envision in the future doing research and development in the microgravity or space environment is going to be something that not just a small community of researchers do, but the entire research enterprise across universities and industry and governments thinks about the opportunities in microgravity. And part of what we want to do through this commercial enterprise is make it available to all.
NASA has this organization, we'll get you later, okay? Don't run away. But NASA has this organization mandated by Congress, I actually think it was on the heels of Apollo 1, but it may have been Challenger, called the ASAP, the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, and it works for Congress. And they report out every year to Congress, and one of its former leaders was Vice Admiral Joe Dyer, and he had a saying, every time he came over here to talk about safety and everything, he said, NASA and the nation needs to have constancy of purpose. We can't keep changing and going back and forth. So my final question to all of you is, how do we ensure continuity of interest and support? You know, as we're in this 50th anniversary of Apollo, everybody except General Gray and me have this belief that all of America was in the street cheering for NASA in the days of Apollo. You know,
They forgot
we
about
didn't, we
Abernathy,
probably didn't even, I mean, we knew it was going on, but we were busy doing other things. And the nation was not all in love with NASA even then. And, you know, the spike in spending went up, and then it came down before we even landed on the moon, to be quite honest. So how do we do something that we found so difficult to do in the past? How do we ensure continuity of interest and support?
No softballs here, huh? Yeah, common purpose, common goals are always a way to unite people, right? So whether it's exploration and what's over that next hill, the excitement of what is out there, and human eyes are witnessing it, not through a lens, not through a camera, but just in person. I think there's a lot of interest and excitement in the human race as explorers.
I'm a little more pessimistic, but I'm optimistic in this sense. We always figure it out. It's messy. It's sloppy. We had a spike in the NASA funding because we were fearful of a very powerful foe, and I don't want to see that again for that reason. And so, but we'll figure it out. We always seem to, and it's like the movie Shakespeare in Love, the guys on the, you know, how does it end? I don't know, it just ends well. And so I just have this belief in America that we through open markets and competition and ingenuity, everyone has a different reason. Some people are motivated by national interest. Some people are motivated to make a buck. Some people are motivated to find an illness. I just have a belief that as long as we unleash the ingenuity of everybody in our society, everybody, that in the end we get there.
Yeah, and I think just communication and letting people know what we're doing and how it's benefiting them, you know, and that may be different for every person, but I still, sometimes I'll take a cab ride and I'll be talking to the cab driver and I say, have you seen the space station, and did you know there are 6 astronauts up there now and it goes by at 17,500 miles an hour? He said, what, really? I thought you guys were shut down. You can never communicate too much, so we just need to keep communicating, and the stories that we can communicate are just going to keep getting better and better.
You all have been great. I want to thank the Potomac Institute for allowing me to be a part of this, and thank everybody for coming out. I will close with a demand, or demand, because there is no free lunch. You know, I do a lot of travel around the world, and particularly this last year. And I am still amazed at how many people outside this country still look at us as the shining city on the hill. Yeah. Don't ever, ever, ever forget that. You know, things come, things go, policies change, policies go. We still represent the one last hope for humanity to a lot of people who don't have the privilege of living in this country. So remember that. Talk about today, whether you're a space junkie or Buffy or whatever you call it. Tell people why you enjoyed it or why you didn't like it, why you thought it was a waste of your time. You sat here for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours for some reason. So I would say your homework is to go out and tell people what you saw and heard today, and bring somebody the next time Potomac Institute or another place does this. Thank you all. Great. Thank you.